Just because ICBC's financial documents are extremely complicated to read. So I just want to make sure you're talking about excess optional capital from ICBC being taken back into the provincial budget. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly right.
And what about the net revenue of ICBC at the end of a year, which is different from excess optional capital? What happens to that?
So basic insurance can't run a surplus, so there is no surplus that government could take from ICBC. Optional insurance can run a surplus, and that is the money that the previous government took out of ICBC. Any other revenue taken in by ICBC would be in the form of either cost recovery services like driver's license administration or ticket revenue from people who are given various tickets, and that would be dispersed according to existing agreements.
And then, so getting into something you need an accounting degree to understand, but there are people who argue that all of this is just optics, and that because of the way the budget is done, that money from ICBC is actually a cash transfer on the budget that government doesn't really take, and it doesn't help create the surplus. It's all there anyways. Can you just explain, like, do governments take money from ICBC to make the provincial surplus look better, or is that just a fallacy and this is all an accounting procedure?
Under the Budget Transparency Act, at the end of the year, any surplus or any deficit that ICBC has is reflected in government's accounts as a whole in terms of whether it has a surplus or a deficit situation. And that was introduced in the early 2000s, that legislation. What I'm talking about is not changing that accountability legislation about government's fiscal picture across all of its crown corporations. I'm talking about capital money that is inside ICBC's investment accounts, and the interest from that capital is used to improve ICBC's bottom line and take the pressure off drivers with lower rates. When that money is inside ICBC in its capital accounts, it can help reduce rate costs through investment income. When it's taken out of ICBC and put into government's account, it reduces government's borrowing costs, but it also deprives ICBC of the ability of using that investment income to reduce rates. That's why it was done by the previous administration, to ease their borrowing costs at the time. The consequence of that is the money was not in ICBC's investment accounts, there was no investment income from that, and it wasn't available to reduce costs.
Okay, Richard.
With the changes to no fault, how much money do you actually believe that there will be in optional in terms of profits?
The goal with the movement to the enhanced care model is that all benefits that come from that in terms of reduced costs for ICBC are passed on to drivers in two forms. One is reduced premiums, so an average of $400 per driver, and the other is in improved benefits. So ideally, ICBC won't see these see any huge increases or changes in surpluses, that they will run as close to break even as possible, so that drivers are only paying the insurance rates that they need to pay in order to cover the costs, which is the whole idea of a public insurer. So that's our goal. However, ICBC should be operating in a way that they generate small surpluses each year. And the question of what happens to that money, which can add up in a hurry within ICBC, is an important one that we should be answering.
And how much political score settling is here?
Well, I think that it's critically important for British Columbians, especially when we're engaging in very significant reforms, and there's a very public debate about the benefit of the reforms and how they will roll out and what government's motivations are and how governments use ICBC, to be as clear as we can about what our intentions are. And it's hard for government to get any clearer than to pass a law that puts into legislation what government's intentions are. Our intentions are that if there is any extra money left over from these reforms, that they will go back to drivers in the form of various benefits, including lower rates. And we're putting that into the law to be as clear as we can, because if you don't do that, it invites people in politics or who have a vested interest to speculate that government is doing this for different reasons.
Tom.
Minister, my files show that the last time this was done was 2015. I'm wondering if that agrees with the ministry's records. And there was an announcement in 2016 that no, we're not going to do this anymore. It seemed at the time, and it seems now, that it didn't happen again because there wasn't anything to transfer out. Is that right?
So for fiscal 2016, there was a small deficit projected at ICBC, and fiscal 2017 was where we started to see the $1 billion deficits at ICBC, and so there were no surpluses to take. And I can get you I'll have staff get you the year-by-year breakdown of transfers from optional capital.
Okay, we got a question from Mike.
If I'm remembering right, I think it used to be illegal in BC to do this, and the Liberals changed the law in order to take the money out of ICBC. Is that correct, or am I remembering that wrong?
I don't know the answer to that question, Mike. Yeah, I don't know the history of that. We'll find out. Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing I'm wondering about is...
Sounds like something I should definitely know.
Yeah, I think that's crazy. I might be wrong there, but I also think previous governments have used BC Hydro like an ATM. Has your government ever taken a dividend out of BC Hydro, and will you be passing a similar law to stop that from happening?
Not to my knowledge. I don't believe that we have, but it's not my file. And I'm not sure what the rules are around BC Hydro transfers or even how it generates surpluses or any of those rules. So
isn't it the same thing, taking money out of Hydro? So I'd pass a law to stop that too.
I actually don't know, Mike. Yeah.
Okay, Les.
Well, just to be clear, you said that anybody wants to change this, they'd need a majority of MLAs. You mean
they'd have to reverse the law.
Yeah, to
That's
repeal
right.
this.
Correct.
Okay, so
it would be a very public process.
It sets a higher barrier, I guess. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so the idea is, I mean, if we could find another way to completely prohibit it, the best we can do is pass a law in order to ensure that any future government that wanted to do this would have to get a majority of votes to repeal the law in order to be able to take that kind of action.
When you're thrashing out this idea, is there any thinking about how unpredictable things are? Are you kind of tying future governments' hands? Is there any situation down the road where this might turn out to be not such a good idea? Some government's desperate for money. ICBC happens to have a pile sitting there.
Yeah, I think if a future government finds themselves in the situation where they think it would be a good idea to transfer money out of optional capital, they can go to the legislature and they can reverse this law. I would suggest that they do so at their peril in terms of the perspectives of British Columbians who understand that when the money comes out of ICBC, that directly impacts their insurance rates. But I certainly can imagine that a government might consider taking that action. The reason for passing this law is to ensure that they couldn't change it quietly by regulation or a direction to the Utility Commission through Order in Council, something like that. Instead, it would have to be a very public debate on the floor of the legislature before money could be taken out.
Okay, Vaughn.
I'm remembering an argument about cross-subsidization between basic rates and optional rates. So this capital accumulates in the optional account, and the argument was that the government should take it because otherwise, effectively, there's some kind of cross-subsidization going on. Can you address that? Because
Yes.
I can't remember the actual details of the argument, but it seems to me there was a cross-subsidization argument here.
Sure. So for 85% of British Columbians, they see no distinction between basic and optional insurance because they buy both. And that is the situation for the vast majority of people in the province. When optional insurance makes money and there's capital generated from that, that capital earns investment income, and that investment income can improve ICBC's bottom line and take the pressure off of optional insurance rates. It has been the case in the past where ICBC's capital picture as a whole has resulted in reductions to basic insurance rates, cross-subsidized by optional insurance. And I think you're going to see in the transition that we have in the spring of next year, significantly less of that because there will be significantly less optional product. There will still be optional products. Top-up of wage loss is one example. Collision coverage is another example. But compared to where we are today, where people are buying $1 million or $2 million or $3 million of third-party extended liability, these are products that won't be offered in a care-based model, aren't necessary, and so theoretically less ability for that cross-subsidization.
ICBC, being able to keep the money, can use it to reduce both sets of rates if they want to, right? As long as the Utilities
That's my
Commission
understanding.
says it's okay.
That's right.
Are there any other questions in the room? Rob.
What if we just made ICBC a not-for-profit, like Manitoba or Saskatchewan? One of those provinces is a not-for-profit. Is that an idea, or did you look at it?
So in my experience, ICBC is a not-for-profit. In terms of the corporate structure of the Crown Corporation and whether it is a corporation or not-for-profit, I don't know enough about the particular nuances of the model in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, where it's a not-for-profit, to know what impact that would have on ICBC. But the goal for ICBC is that it is not out to generate significant profits. It's operating near break-even and passing on as much as possible any savings that might be available to drivers.
So this doesn't, like, for an ordinary driver who's seeing the rates go up, who's looking at your reviews to ICBC and forecasting a day when the corporation starts making a ton of money again, and there's a whole bunch of VPs and the executive salary goes up and ICBC's stockpiling money and people aren't seeing their rates go down. Does that in any way address this idea that one day ICBC is going to be flush with cash again and doing whatever it wants with the money?
Yeah, so the goal of this reform is an answer to concerns that people might have about the reforms we're bringing in the spring. Sure, you're going to pass on some savings to drivers. Sure, there will be improved benefits. But what happens if ICBC starts making money? Will government start using that as a way to transfer money over into government general revenue instead of passing those savings on to drivers? If those surpluses begin to accumulate, if this is something that ICBC experiences, this will continue the public pressure on ICBC and restrict future government's ability to transfer that money anywhere else except to reduce rates or increase benefits for drivers.
Okay, I think that was the last question. Thank you, Minister.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.